In this video, we're going to be looking over 4 community created concepts for the upcoming Alien chapter. If you haven't seen this series before, we review the power of the killer, their special abilities, and perks that you guys created to get an idea of what the killer will be like when it's released. We can then retroactively compare your concepts to the real chapter to see who did it better. In the past, some of these community concepts have actually been pretty close to reality, so let's see what you all have in mind for the Xenomorph. Our first concept is from Insane Gwynplaine, with the power Perfect Hunter. You were bred to be the perfect organism with all others as your prey. Prowl. Hold the active ability button to crawl on all fours, gaining the undetectable status effect and the ability to crawl on walls no higher than 16 meters off the ground. You cannot deactivate your power while on a wall. While on a wall, hold the power button for 5 seconds to brace, hissing softly but allowing you to use your tail to attack from a distance of 8 meters, or pounce anywhere within 16 meters. Attacking with your tail does 1 state of damage as well as hindering the target. Attacking has a cooldown of 3 seconds. Pouncing on a survivor will deal a state of damage, but missing will stun you for 5 seconds. So I think some of the range and some of the timings are off here, but this is probably the most fun idea for how the Xenomorph should actually work. If we've seen anything with characters like Wesker and Blight, movement-based attacks can be really fun. The question here is whether or not behavior can actually implement something like this, crawling on ceilings. The version of the power here feels way too difficult to use, but I think that with the right swapping of mechanics and timings, I think that this is a pretty solid idea for a fun chase killer. Facehuggers. You start with 6 eggs on the map, with 2 hatching after 30 seconds in the match. An egg hatching spawns a facehugger that will patrol the map, chasing any survivor that comes within 20 meters, which is pretty big, trying to latch onto their head. If they are caught, they become infected with an embryo, which will hatch in 3 minutes, killing the survivor. So we have some kind of passive slowdown going on. They can be cured by 1 of 2 surgery tables around the map, entering for 30 seconds to carry out the procedure. That's very long to be just completely inactive. 30 seconds is nearly half a generator. If found, the killer can instantly pull out the survivor, putting them in the dying state, but killing the embryo in the process. So there's only 2 surgery tables in the map, and the survivors have to go to it and spend 30 seconds inside, and then they can just get pulled out and put on a hook. So essentially, you could just patrol back and forth between 2 surgery tables and win the match by just free hooking survivors. So I'll let you know my thoughts on this at the end. Once an embryo has died, a new egg will hatch after 15 seconds, spawning a new facehugger with no more than 2 in the map at any given time. So here's the thing, it's actually not that bad of an idea to use facehuggers as a 1v4 sort of passive slowdown, but this specific idea is really bad just because it rewards the Xenomorph for essentially doing nothing. You just need to camp the surgery tables and you literally win the game. So obviously that would need to be changed, but I still think there's a solid idea in using the facehuggers as a passive 1v4 slowdown. All right, let's move on to the perks. First up, we have Bloodthirsty. You know how to handle packs of prey, letting you divert your attention onto the weakest link. Oh god. Whenever a group of 2 or more survivors gather together, you see the auras of any injured survivors for 7 seconds after they leave their group. So here's the thing, I actually really like the idea of this perk because say 2 survivors get together and they, for whatever reason, try to rush a gen or whatever it is, and then they leave the group without healing, then you see their aura. So I kind of think that idea is cool, but here's the problem. The problem is that anytime a survivor is unhooked, if they don't heal underneath the hook, you're going to see the survivor who just got unhooked's aura, which makes this a really effective tunneling perk, which it's even in the description. It says it lets you divert your attention on the weakest link. I don't know if that's exactly what he meant, but that's how it comes across. So there would need to be some kind of protection for survivors who are freshly unhooked, and then I think this could actually be a really cool perk. Ambush Predator. You can pick up your prey one after another, slowly weakening their resolve. With each survivor killed by any means, your terror radius is reduced by 4 meters up to a minimum of 20 meters. So again, this is another tunneling perk because it's encouraging you to kill survivors off as fast as possible for a relatively small reward. Half of the survivors being dead would be equal to just using Monitor and Abuse. So fundamentally, the perk isn't too well thought out, but you could rework this into something like Scorn Choke Pain Resonance, where there's 4 tokens, and each time you hook a survivor for the first time, your terror radius is reduced by a certain amount of meters. Then I think you would have a pretty cool Scorn Choke on your hands. Lastly, we have Hex for the Hive. You were born to serve your blood, doing all you can to ensure their survival. With each additional Hex perk active, your movement speed is increased by 5% up to a maximum of a 135% movement speed. If any Hex perk is broken, including for the Hive, all survivors on the map scream, revealing their location for 5 seconds and suffering from the incapacitated status effect for 9 seconds. The incapacitated status effect makes survivors incapable of doing any action except moving. So 135% movement speed, even for a Hex, right out of the gate is way too strong. You could literally win your matches easily before this totem was ever cleansed. However, I do think there is a decent idea for tying movement speed to a Hex. You could potentially do 5%, and then for each additional Hex totem that gets cleansed on the map, you could add these extra effects like incapacitated or screaming and revealing their location. So there would still be a reason to run it with multiple Hex perks, but it by itself would just give you the 5% movement speed buff. I think that with all the different movement speed buffs we have in the game going on right now for Survivor and Killer when it comes to perks, I think that this might actually fit in pretty well. Overall, this concept has some pretty good ideas, but there's a lot of flaws in the details. Up next, we actually have the community concept from Rarithlynx, and if you don't know who that is, they make all of the really awesome community concept videos on YouTube. So this is taken from, I believe, one, if not actually their first community concept they ever made. So it's pretty old, but let's take a look at it and see what they thought would be cool for an alien chapter. Power, lethal life form. Lethal life form's power gauge takes 50 seconds to fully recharge. Special ability Skulk. Skulk is like a stealthy stock. Press and hold the power button and release while the power gauge is full to begin skulking. Press and hold again to deactivate, which depletes power gauge by 20%. So if I'm getting this right, you kind of have this 50 seconds of a power gauge and you can spend it like currency, and then it just automatically recharges as you're not using it. While skulking, the Xenomorph gains the following benefits. Your vaulting speed is 15% faster. Survivors within 32 meters of you hear a distant terror radius. You are undetectable. So even though you're undetectable, they're going to be hearing a distant terror radius. So they'll know you're around, but they won't know what direction you're coming from, which can be pretty useful. Your basic attack is replaced with Maiming Rig. Special ability Hunt. Pressing the active ability button while skulking causes the Xenomorph to heighten its awareness, detecting life forms nearby with sudden ease. Activating Hunt slows you briefly and causes all survivors within your distant terror radius to be highlighted with Killer Instinct for 5 seconds. Survivors affected this way briefly hear a hissing audio cue, so they'll at least know that they've been detected and that there's no reason to continue trying to hide. So that's at least well thought out. Hunt can only be activated once during each Skulk activation, and it depletes 30% of lethal life form's power gauge, so it takes a pretty big chunk out of it immediately. Special attack Maiming Rig. Press and hold the power button and then press the attack button to initiate Maiming Rig. This can also be initiated by pressing and holding the attack button while skulking. The Xenomorph holds its claws out to the side and charges forward, able to rush and steer itself as it rends any creature within its path. So it sort of looks like it operates a little bit like Hillbilly would. Coming into contact with any survivors during your Maiming Rig will injure that survivor, colliding with the environment will briefly stun you and end Maiming Rig. So yes, very much like Hillbilly. Maiming Rig's duration is based on the remainder of the power gauge. 10% equals 1 second of duration. So it drains your power gauge pretty fast. I like the idea of a currency-based killer. Now, I don't think that this is the most interesting idea for the Xenomorph, but I think that applying this to a different killer is actually a really cool idea. Again, this concept is kind of old, so a lot of what's here is already sort of present in other killers, and it doesn't come across very unique. Back then at the time, it probably would have been one of the most unique powers in the game, but now it feels very underwhelming. Let's go ahead and take a look at the perks. First up, we have Isolating Dread. After injuring a survivor, they suffer from the blindness and oblivious status effects as long as they are being chased, and lasts for an additional 10 seconds after the chase ends. I think that this perk is probably one of the most needed perks in the game right now, and I say that because Windows of Opportunity is statistically the most used perk in the game, so having a counter perk to Windows of Opportunity directly, I think is actually a really cool idea, and it maybe would make people think twice about running Windows of Opportunity because the perk would lose a lot of its value inside of a chase. Up next, we have Out of Sight. Performing a vault action grants you undetectable for 15 seconds. Out of Sight has a cooldown of 30 seconds. So not the strongest meta perk in the game or anything like that, but it's a pretty decent perk, and I'm sure that you could use it in niche ways the more you sort of thought about it and come up with some pretty interesting builds. Again, nothing crazy, but I think serviceable enough. Lastly, we have Hex Stowaway. Whenever you gain the undetectable status effect, there's a dull totem remaining on the map. This hex is applied to it and it can't occur again for another 20 seconds. Whenever a hex stowaway totem is cleansed by a survivor, they emit a terror radius of 24 meters for 20 seconds. Any number of hex stowaway totems can be on the map at a time. So what this perk allows you to do is it allows you to turn every dull totem on the map into a hex totem relatively fast, depending on what killer you're playing as. For instance, if you're playing as somebody like Ghostface, you could stealth every 20 seconds, and which would create another hex totem on the map. I think that although I like the idea of this perk, I think that would need to be reined back a bit. Maybe every 40 seconds you can create another hex totem, or every minute. With Hex Pentimento in the game now and a lot of other hexes in the game now, I think this would become too strong. It's turning every single dull totem on the map into a hex totem, which can be insanely strong if paired with something like Devour Hope and Hex Pentimento. So good idea, but needs to be reined back a little bit. Overall, it's a pretty mid idea for a concept. Like I said, it's old. If it would have been back then, I think it would have been pretty awesome, but now as the game's evolved, this isn't all that interesting, especially for the Xenomorph. Up next, we of course have a concept from Awesome Alan 1, who's been in most, if not all, of these video concept reviews. He calls the power for his Xenomorph Alien Ambush. Your natural talent for hunting and the need to keep prey alive allows for many unique and deadly situations. Alien Ambush. Press the power button when near a generator to plant an ovomorph egg. You are limited to 1 egg for every 2 generators needed for the exit. When a survivor begins working on the generator, the ovomorph egg will hatch, causing one facehugger to leap out and attach itself to a nearby survivor, destroying the ovomorph egg in the process. When a facehugger attaches itself to a survivor, they will be put into the dying state for 10 seconds, then fully recover to their previous state. They can no longer be interacted with. Upon recovery, a countdown will begin, and over time they will experience stacking status effects. Stage 1, healing speed is decreased and survivor noises are increased by 25%. Makes sense. Healing speed is decreased and survivor noises are increased by 50%. Again, makes sense. Stage 3, the survivor will cough periodically and their aura is shown to you for 15 seconds. That's pretty heavy duty. I don't know about 15 seconds, but we'll see. Stage 4, the survivor is put into the dying state and the bleed out rate is increased by 75%, which basically just means you go into the dying state and you immediately die. If a survivor bleeds out while a host, a chestburster erupts and sacrifices them instantly, while also attacking one healthy survivor within 8 meters, removing a health state. Survivors can perform the remove parasite action on one another, performing in a series of great skill checks to potentially remove the chestburster inside, with a success rate of 100% that lowers by 20% as each stage progresses. This action can be repeated until successful. So here's the problem with the Alien Ambush, is it's a very uninteractive power. You put an egg on a generator that has 0 counterplay, and then basically the survivor gets a pig trap on their head for working on the gen. It's very, very gen focused, 3 genny, and I think people would absolutely be disgusted if this was the power that came out. When a facehugger attaches itself to a survivor, they will be put into the dying state for 10 seconds. So you lay there for 10 seconds. During that time, the Xenomorph cannot pick you up. Then you fully recover to your previous state. So if you were healthy when you started working on the gen, you stand up healthy. But then if the Xenomorph is standing above you, they get basically a free hit. And if you're injured, they get a free down. Very uninteractive and boring. A countdown will begin over time, which I really like the idea of using the chest bursters or the face huggers as passive slowdown for a 1v4 is a really good idea, but the way it's implemented here is pretty horrific, to be honest. And yeah, people would be furious if this was the power of the Xenomorph. But there is more, so let's continue to read. Alien Isolation. When there is one generator remaining, Alien Ambush, the original power, is replaced with Alien Isolation. Haha. Press the power button when near an exit to plant an ovomorph egg, limited to one egg at a time. So essentially, when there's only 3 gens left, instead of being able to put your eggs on the generator, you instead can put 1 egg on an exit gate and trap it. But let's be honest, if they go to the exit gate, even if you have no way out, I believe that they wouldn't really do anything unless they can't leave the trial while impregnated, which could be interesting, I suppose. At least he did put something in there about 3-genning, because you can no longer use your power once there's only 3 generators left. But again, very lackluster and not very interesting. All right, lastly, we have special ability Hide. Press the active ability button to hide on a tree, wall, or ceiling, granting the undetectable status effect and showing the orders of survivors within 32 meters. Special ability Hunting Ground. Hold the active ability button while hidden to leap from your location, attacking a survivor with your tail. So this is kind of similar to the original first concept we reviewed, where the Xenomorph can climb on a wall and sort of hit survivors with either their tail or some kind of pounce attack from that position. And again, I think that's the most interactive chase ability you're going to be able to come up with. It's more of a question of how it's implemented and if behavior can actually implement it. If they can, though, I think it would be pretty awesome. All right, let's move on to the perks. First up, we have Perfect Host. The entity understands your need to keep the survivors alive. When a survivor is hooked, all survivors outside of your terror radius gain the Oblivious status effect for 30 seconds. If all generators are completed, all survivors remaining gain an extra hook stage but cannot vault for the rest of the trial. So the first part of this perk is really good for just the general gameplay of the match, and you might not like the last part of this perk because it gives all of the survivors an extra hook stage and it's an endgame perk, but I actually like it a lot. I think it could pair really well with something like No Way Out, Game of Foot, and Rancor, allowing you to kill a lot of survivors at the end of the match. Even if they have an extra hook stage, you don't really have to worry about it because you're using Rancor to kill them immediately, and they can't vault windows, which is pretty massive. All around, I think a cool idea that fits lore-wise with the Xenomorph and also pairs well with making some fun endgame builds. Next up, we have a Necronom 4. As their success grows closer, so does the fog. The height and thickness of the fog increases for every survivor by 8% every time a generator is completed. You are no longer affected by the fog. So I'm not sure if behavior again can technically create a perk like that, but if they can and you can have a sort of a different vision from the survivors, I think it's pretty cool. The only thing is though, is I'm not so sure it's best suited for an alien chapter. I think I'd rather maybe see this on something like the Slender Man. But overall, it's actually a pretty cool idea for a perk if it can be pulled off. Hex Prometheus, a hex that both steals from and gives to the survivors. All survivors have 3 perks shuffled between them at the start of the trial, and any duplicate perks are voided and considered to be an empty perk slot. The swap persists until the totem is destroyed, but the survivor who cleanses the totem will lose all perks. This could be used as sort of a tunnel perk because you're stripping one survivor of all their perks and you know they're going to be easier to kill. It's also kind of annoying. Instead of this actually being a perk, what I would like to see, because I kind of like the idea, is maybe have this apply to some future original killer that messes with the survivors' minds. It would be a cooler killer power than it would actually be a perk, and that way it would be tied to just one killer and you wouldn't have to worry about really tryhard sweaty killers running this, and then you as a player go into a match and someone forces self-care on you and you lose all of your really good perks that you wanted, and then you're punished for cleansing the totem. Funny idea, but yeah, not as a perk. Too annoying. Overall, kind of okay, but if implemented exactly how it's written, it would be an absolute disaster. People would be furious and they'd probably protest. So I'm gonna have to give this one a pretty low score. For the final concept, we have Basso Kun's Xenomorph. Power. The Xenomorph has movement-based vision. Survivors standing still are invisible to the Xenomorph's eyes. Kinda cool. However, the survivors in line of sight running within an 18 meters are slightly highlighted in white. Again, pretty cool. I like the idea of feeling like you're playing as an alien. The invisibility strength while standing still becomes less and less as they remain within the Xenomorph's close vicinity. Special ability wall climb. Here we go again. Press the interaction button to climb any vertical surface. The Xenomorph can also crawl on ceilings. Special ability leap. Press and hold the power button to charge a leap. The longer the button is held, the further it can leap to a maximum. Leaping from the ground has a maximum distance of 8 meters. Leaping from a wall or ceiling has a maximum distance of 15 meters, rewarding you for actually attempting to do it from a vertical surface. The Xenomorph can perform a leap attack by pressing the attack button during the leap. Performing a leap attack leaves the Xenomorph in a state of fatigue afterwards, which needs to have a risk versus reward element to it. Otherwise, they would just miss and then instantly hit you, so that would be dumb. And leap has a cooldown of 8 seconds. So again, this goes back to that leap or crawling attack idea, but this one seems way more thought out than the other concepts. All right, moving on, we have Parasite. On a downed or hooked survivor, press the ability button to insert a parasite into their body, increasing their parasitic stage by 1. Now, I like already the idea that he's using the 1v4 in more of a way that is balanced and not super cringe like the other concepts where it's just like completely passive. Here, you actually have to work for it because you have to impregnate the survivor while they're down. It sounds a little weird, but you get the idea. From a balance perspective, it's way more well thought out. And you also don't gain anything, same with Pig, when you tunnel somebody that you've impregnated or put a head trap on, because you lose all of your slowdown if you're tunneling the one person that has the passive slowdown applied to them. So you're basically just shooting yourself in the foot, and I see pigs do that all the time, but that's a rant we'll just ignore for this video. Stage 1, the survivor will automatically die in 4 minutes. Stage 2, remaining death timer shortened by 33%. The survivor suffers from hemorrhage. Stage 3, remaining death timer shortened by 33% again. The survivor suffers from exposed and hemorrhage, which is pretty brutal. A medical station is spawned next to each exit gate as well as the main building, so there's 3. Survivors can use a medical station to reduce their parasitic stage by 1. To do so, they must hold the interaction button for 8 seconds and are faced with continuous skill checks. So 8 seconds is way more reasonable than the 30 seconds we saw on the medical station from the other concept. And you're also interacting, you're doing skill checks to get through it and not just AFKing in a machine waiting to get grabbed out of it. Reducing a parasitic stage lengthens the remaining death timer by 33%. Missing a skill check alerts the Xenomorph and renders the medical station unusable for 10 seconds. Kind of savage. The timer is paused whenever the survivor is being chased, is in the dying state, or is on a hook, so same again as Pig's head traps. Alright, chestburster Xenomorphs. When a survivor dies in any way, chestburster Xenomorphs amount equal to the survivor's parasitic stage burst out from the survivor's chest. A chestburster Xenomorph roams by itself and will attack any survivor they find. Chestburster Xenomorphs attack by leaping in a straight line, which leaves them in a state of fatigue. During fatigue, they can be crushed by survivors, I'm guessing like Victor, using their interaction button. This reveals your location to the Xenomorph. Pretty cool. Newborn Xenomorphs also have movement-based vision. I really feel like this power is super well thought out. The only thing that stands out to me is maybe the stages could be a little bit more interesting. I think being exposed when you're about to die anyway is a bit redundant. Maybe put some other things in those stages to make them a little bit more interesting. All right, moving on to the perks. First, we have Apex Adaptability. Striving for perfection, you cannot fathom letting prey get away in front of you. Gain bloodlust 30% faster during chases. Decrease of bloodlust when the survivor escaped is 50% slower, and breaking a pallet does not reset bloodlust. All right. This perk we have to talk about because this is a definite no-go. I think that there might be something here, but this version of it is completely boring and unfair for Survivor. So what I would do if I had to rework this perk is I would just make it to where you just never lose your bloodlust until you hit a survivor or break a pallet. That way, let's say you're chasing a survivor and you're bloodlust 3, but they make it to a god pallet and you're like, okay, I cannot continue to chase this person, they're too good, but I can now leave this chase without breaking the god pallet, go look for another survivor and have that bloodlust 3 already built up so that I get a little bit of an advantage in the next chase I start because I got absolutely nothing for the previous chase. I think that way the perk could work, but this version is very cheesy and nobody really likes bloodlust anyway. Vicious Touch. You have learned to block escape routes using your saliva. Hitting a survivor with a basic attack causes all windows and pallets within 20 meters to become sticky for 15 seconds, which slows down vaulting speed by 30%. Vicious Touch has a cooldown of 20 seconds. I think this is a pretty decent chase perk. Some people could maybe think it's too strong. It would probably depend on how badly that 30% affected vaulting speed. If it didn't affect it that severely, to the point where you're just crawling through the window and your hitbox is 55 miles behind you while you're trying to run, there's a lot of questions there. How does it work with fast vaults, medium vaults, slow vaults, things like that? But I think there's definitely room for this perk to exist. Lastly, we have Predator's Instinct. Humans are creatures of habit, and it becomes easy to predict which direction they are going even after losing line of sight. During a chase, survivors breaking line of sight within 15 meters have their aura shown to you for 1 second. Predator's Instinct has a cooldown of 3 seconds. So my initial thought is that this perk is way too strong, especially on certain killers like Pyramid Head. If you combine this with Lethal Pursuer, for instance, you're getting 3 seconds of aura reading every single time a survivor is breaking line of sight with you, essentially, because 3-second cooldown is pretty much nothing, and that's going to allow you to be completely unmind gameable. And I think that's kind of cheesy. A better version of a perk, even though it'd be significantly weaker, would probably be that if a survivor escapes a chase from you and you no longer are in the chase with them, then maybe it shows you the aura of that survivor who got away, or it shows you the aura of any survivors in your terror radius so that you can quickly get back into a new chase or hunt that person down if they had lucky break or something like that. I like the idea of a perk that keeps the momentum going so that, you know, killers aren't so reluctant to go back into the tunnel camp mindset. Overall opinion of this concept though is it's well thought out, has a lot of interactivity going on, and out of all the concepts, I'd say this one probably would be my favorite if it was actually implemented, which isn't saying much because they all suck. Overall though, really cool concept. My final thoughts are that Basu-kun had the most well thought out concept, but that there's a lot of good ideas mixed with the other concepts. I would have liked to see some more incorporation of the motion tracker, like a special item survivors need to track the Xenomorph. I would have also liked to see some acid blood show up in the power somewhere, like if you stun the Xenomorph with the pallet has acid blood on it, and that puts the survivor into maybe the deep wound status effect if they vaulted before the blood goes away. But these concepts don't get into add-ons and things like that, so there's always room to add more aspects from the movie in the add-ons. I also believe Ripley is going to be a part of this chapter, and it would be cool to do a community concept review of Ripley, basically to review her perks, but I think we'll know pretty much everything about the Alien chapter here very soon, so we'll see if that's actually worth doing. Alrighty, with that said, let me know what your favorite concept from the video was. If you have your own ideas, make sure to comment below and let me know. And as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.